Hello and welcome to Almost 30 Podcast.
Hello, friends. Welcome to the show.
It's a radio show if your
girls.
dad's asking.
It's our girls, Lindsey and Krista.
Yeah. Welcome to Almost 30.
Who did you listen to growing up? Like, what was your lineup?
Kiss 107
Okay.
was ours.
Kiss
It was like
107,
it was like Kiss 107 FM and it would be like dun, dun, hot and so hot in here. And you'd be like, yeah.
Totally.
And it would be like the Black Eyed Peas all the time.
I always wondered like what the host looked like because their voices
gosh.
sounded so cool.
Totally agree.
And they got to meet all the artists. Ours was 94.5. I think it started as 97.5 PST, but then it turned into 94.5 PST. Fun fact. My sister's now husband was one of the hosts.
No.
Mm-hmm.
Does he have a good voice?
He has a great voice.
Wow.
Yeah, I remember listening to him like on our ride to school.
Wow.
And then my sister like interned there.
Uh-oh, you know what happened then.
They didn't date for a few years, but yeah. I kind of missed the radio, to be honest with you.
Oh my gosh.
It was kind of like a friend.
It was crazy, like, because it kind of started to be unhinged where they'd be like prank calling.
Oh my God.
Do you remember they would like start prank calling people?
Catch people cheating.
Yes, they would catch people cheating, but then it was like fake. Like it was just like reality show where it started probably real and then turned out to be fake.
Those were some like, I like waited in the car and didn't go to school to like finish those. Those were
I can imagine.
insane.
I think I was at Kiss 107. It was Kiss 107.1 and this is Ohio. And then there's 94.9, the Wiz or the Buzz. And then 103.5 WEBN was what my dad listened to, which was like rock and roll.
Oh, wow. Oh, cool.
It was like rock and roll. And 109.1 was like Q102. And that was like
Q102.
Cool. Yeah. That was like kind of cool. Like,
yeah.
But I think CDs was like, then I was just like, oh, CDs only.
Yeah, totally.
I need to have control.
Like all your burned CDs.
Yeah, all the burned CDs. Oh my God. And you just like skip to tracks.
That millennial starter pack.
For real, the sickest burned CD. This kid named Joel, like the only Jewish kid in Ohio where I lived. He had a bar mitzvah and it was so much fun. It was like great. We all got burned CDs.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. And it was like,
it was like sick. The track that played at the bar mitzvah.
Because it was really conservative Catholic where I lived. It wasn't like preference, but it was just like what it was. And so we were like, whoa, bar mitzvahs are amazing. Like, and we got fun. CDs. We had so much fun. We're like, this is great. Like, we're loving this. And the CD had like D12, Eminem on it.
Oh, D12. Wow.
I don't know what that song was, but there was Eminem, D12. Yeah. Oh, Purple Pills. I've been so many places. It was like,
I don't know that.
It was like all about popping pills, and I was literally like 15.
Dude, that's crazy.
Singing about that. There was actually this reel on Instagram where this girl had a picture of her when she was like 13, and she's like me when I was listening to this song, and it was like the song, and it was like thong song and stuff. Like basically the photo of you aligned with the actual clip of the music that you were listening to.
You have like your braces and like your trucker hat.
For real. My tan was popping.
Your gradient sunglasses.
Yes. My eyebrows were like little worms.
Speaking of artists, I had like this weird but sweet thought the other day. It just like overwhelmed me. I was like, I am so happy for the Backstreet Boys. I'm so happy that they keep
I'm obsessed with you.
That they like are, first of all still friends, having this opportunity to probably make millions and millions and millions of dollars for this residency in Las Vegas. It looks like they're having a pretty decent time. They all have their families, like whatever. Yeah. They're going to work for a few months, make at least a few $1,000,000 each, probably more. Like how great. And they're like 50.
Yeah, that is good. It's like great that because a lot of times they'll just work for a little bit and they won't have the opportunity for a longer career.
Yeah.
So it's great that they have like that opportunity.
I just thought it was so sweet. Meanwhile, I was like in the audience at their concert when I was little being like, AJ is absolutely going to marry me. Like,
no, I was like, as soon as Justin takes one look, Justin is hopping off of stage and
I know.
It's on. Like
just catch a glimpse.
That I need science. I need actually a neuroscientist to sit me down and tell me the science behind the belief that the person on stage is going to see you and like
I know
leave.
I kind of like the confidence though.
That's a good one.
You know, that's like I wouldn't want a little girl being like, don't look at me.
Yeah,
I'm ugly. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I love that confidence.
Yeah, that's so true.
Or just getting lost in the fantasy is like probably that young imagination of just like, I don't even
It
know.
is. It's just like a hormone chemical cocktail that's like creating this
Totally.
like fantasy world. What I think is so weird that there's like weird old rich men that are like, we're creating something that's solar powered by little girls' hormonal
Wait,
like
what?
response. Like, okay, think about it. So BSB and NSYNC, the audience was like 12-year-olds, 14.
Back in the day.
Yes.
Yes.
We were young. I don't know how old I was.
Yeah, I was probably 13.
12, 13, whatever.
13.
So like there's men and executive men in rooms that are like,
I know.
this whole thing is actually not for like the same age. It's for women that are like 8 years younger than this. And that's our fandom that's powering this. Yes.
Oh, 100%.
Is just young. And it's like their parents actually, because my dad had to go with us to the concerts.
Same.
My dad had the best time.
Dude.
He was like bebopping, like they're good. He was like, that's an amazing show. Because they were like flying on bungees. Like
they were flying.
They were like super soakering everyone. Like, I mean, they were amazing performers and dancers.
Yeah,
those moves.
Incredible.
I remember one of my girlfriends when I was little, her name was Chelsea. She was the most beautiful, beautiful girl. And she was an amazing dancer. And so she would just spend 8 hours learning the Britney Spears like dance in her house. And then I would like sit on the floor and like watch her perform it. Because I was like, that's not for me. I was like, I know one thing I know one thing that's not for me. And so she would like Slave for You. Like I would just watch her like learn Slave for You, and she would do Slave for You forever.
Also Slave for You.
I know, my gosh. Honestly, her parents were like, yeah, girl, Slave for You. Yeah, Slave for You. Be like, do this sexy dance as a child. All good.
I don't know why. Last thing. I guess I know why, but wouldn't it be nice for all the pop stars of that time who are like okay right now to rally around those that are not okay and be like,
oh yeah,
you know, like a Britney. Like I think Britney's one of the only is the one I'm thinking about, but it'd be so nice if they were like, let's save her. What's happening?
For sure. Well,
I think it's too far gone, but
there's just so many layers with so much of it.
I know.
You know, like what is real and what's not? What's really going on?
Yeah, I know. This is not the episode to
That's
do it.
But this is the perfect segue into our conversation with Dr. Sarah Hill on PMS.
Perfect segue.
When you're little, you have a little period starts.
When did you start your period?
I don't know where I was or what I was doing, to be honest. I know a lot of people have like a stark memory.
Yeah.
I don't really know or remember. I think I was 13.
Yeah. I was 14, yeah.
I remember that friend Chelsea that did Slave for You. She started when she was like 10.
Wow.
Yeah. Slave for You.
Intense.
It started it early.
Yeah. Conjuring.
Literally.
Jesus Christ.
He called it forth. Dude, honestly, that's so crazy. So today's conversation with Dr. Sarah Hill, if you guys remember, we had a really powerful conversation. A lot of the clips went viral. This was like a huge one. Your brain on birth control. And a lot of the conversation was talking about the effects on birth control that I think a lot of us overlooked. I overlooked. I was on birth control from a young age. I got off when I was like 26. And how it impacts, you know, who you choose as a mate, how it impacts how you think, how it impacts your emotions.
Yeah.
And, you know, my intention with that conversation personally wasn't to be like, we're bad for being on birth control or not, but just to really make us aware that there are really, really powerful impacts of birth control on us as women that we should be thoughtful about when we're engaging with that type of drug that we take every single day for years and years and years on end.
100%. It's one of our most popular episodes for sure. And she's just such a wealth of knowledge. And her new book, The Period Brain, The New Science of Why We PMS and How to Fix It. I told her, I was like, I feel like this is so timely, you know, where I've just been hearing from so many, or I've even been seeing this too, people speaking about it online, just the experience of really painful periods or like literally having 2 weeks out of the month where people are out of commission. And I'm like, wait, what? Yeah. This is like, that's debilitating. So people are experiencing like very debilitating PMS symptoms. And so she goes into just the fact that, you know, this is really kind of like a mismatch in terms of your biology and the environment that you are in, and not just literally the environment, what's around you, but your lifestyle, what you're eating, your stress levels. And she particularly looks at the luteal phase, and just what we are doing, consuming, how we be during that phase, and how it affects
How we be.
how we be.
She's looking at how we be.
Well, so many of us are doing during that phase.
Okay, yeah. So that was the little thing there. Instead of it's how we be, instead of how we do, it's how we be.
We are a human being.
I know. I want to make a podcast called How We Be.
So we talk a lot about how you can support yourself during the luteal phase. We talk about how PMS in her studies is really a neuroendocrinological mystery. And she's discovered some really interesting things that has made it click for thousands of women. So it's going to be fascinating whether you experience painful periods or not, because we also talk about, and this was a topic I didn't expect to talk about with her, but I asked her about how this is related to what we're seeing, or how it could be related to what we're seeing in terms of infertility in women. Because during the luteal phase, it's an incredibly important phase related to getting pregnant and fertility. So it is an incredible listen. She is just an angel on earth. And we also talk about birth control as well, because I think it's a good reminder for people who haven't listened to that episode, who haven't really dipped into the research on birth control, maybe are curious, maybe are experiencing some things that they're wondering if it's connected to their use of birth control. And again, we're not saying take it or not, because it does help a lot of people with certain conditions, and that makes perfect sense. But it's just good to know.
Mm-hmm.
Know the
I always
facts.
say, when I got off birth control, I felt like a veil lifted. And I finally was like, this is who I am.
Mm-hmm.
And that was actually true, because my brain was no longer using synthetic drugs to create hormones in my body.
It was such a reminder for me in this conversation. I forgot that being on birth control, you're not ovulating. Like you're not, you're essentially the same all month long, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah.
And
if you want them to be productive.
Yeah.
I'm on the tip of the man lately, and that's the man.
That's the man.
Keeping us just all one thing.
But there's such a beauty.
Because then they can program us.
Of course.
And then they can have us work.
But there's such a beauty in our cycle. We talk about that too, because it's just this incredibly dynamic experience we have every month. Mm-hmm. And I think once you understand what may be causing your PMS symptoms and you kind of get that under control, you can really leverage the ebb and flow of your energy, of what, your body wants to be doing or not doing. It's like a much more dynamic experience in life, rather than like going or fasting every day, or, just kind of that everyday sameness.
Yeah, completely agree.
So the new book is The Period Brain. It is out now. You can follow Sarah Hill on Instagram at Sarah Hill PhD. Thank you, Sarah, for coming on the show.
Thank you, Sarah. Make sure to dig into the first episode too. It was just such a powerful one to learn about birth control. We also have a bunch of episodes about birth control with Alyssa Vitti. We've talked about birth control probably since like 2017 something. I think we were the first ever talking about. Just kidding. We weren't the first, but we definitely had the conversation pretty early. And so excited for you guys to dig into that. Thank you so much, Sarah. We appreciate and love you. We will see you on the other side. Enjoy this one. Share it with a friend. Start the conversation. And bye-bye.
Bye. Okay, well, I'm super, super excited to have you in person. Krista got you last time.
I know, and I'm so excited that I get to hang out with you this time.
Me too.
Although, of course, I miss Krista, but
I know. I talked to her this morning. I was like, I'm going to hang with Sarah today. She's like, what? I'm like, I know. It's going to be a good one. Congratulations on the new book.
Thank you.
The Period Brain. Your episode that we had a couple years ago is one of our most popular episodes. Talk of hormones and birth control have been topics that our audience has been interested in for a long time now. And I feel like we were kind of talking about this just between Krista and I on the show early on, because we had, taken our journeys we went off birth control and we're just like sharing about it honestly. So I'm really excited to bring yet another experience that we have as women, just into the spotlight, because I feel like, and I was saying this before we hopped on, so many of my friends are suffering in silence, thinking that having incredibly painful periods or having these intense PMS symptoms for half the month is normal.
Right.
So we're going to get into it. I really wanted to start off with what you wrote in the book, that PMS is and I'm going to say this correctly, a neuroendocrinological, can you say that for me?
Neuroendocrinological.
Thank you. Mystery. So what did you discover that really made this like click?
Well, so to get into that, I just want to, first address what we know about hormones, right? And we know that hormones coordinate events in the body, and that it sort of shifts our psychology and shifts our body to solving different types of problems. Mm-hmm. And there's been a lot of discussion, and I'm sure that you've seen this on your social media feed, and I'm sure that this has been the topic of some of the conversations you've had with your girlfriends and with Krista, is about estrogen. Right. And like when you're in this estrogenic phase of the cycle, like right near ovulation, that your body is sort of gearing up for the possibility of conception. And so you feel really sexy and you feel alive and you have energy and all of these things. And essentially your body is conspiring to get you to have sex, right? Because this is the time in the cycle when sex can lead to conception. And we've inherited this brain, right, that's been wired to want to get us pregnant. Right. Because genes that did that, or genes associated with that, they would have got passed down a lot.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And so there's all of this discussion about estrogen does these things, and they all make a lot of sense. And then nobody really talks about the second half of the cycle. Right. And so like what goes on after, because if we think about a typical cycle, and we'll just say a 28-day menstrual cycle, just for the sake of simplicity. The first half of the menstrual cycle is characterized by the dominance of the hormone estrogen, right? Again, all about sex and conception and feeling sexy and energetic. And then the second half of the cycle is dominated by the sex hormone progesterone. And progesterone is not really discussed, right? There's all kinds of discussion around estrogen, but we really don't know a whole lot about what progesterone does in terms of, or there's not a lot of discussion about what progesterone does in terms of psychological changes, or, all of this. All that we know about is like PMS, right? And the fact that many women have this experience of feeling terrible. And I went to the research literature, to try to figure out like, how common is it to feel terrible in the week or two leading up to your period? And the research finds that it's somewhere around 85% of women have some experience of, not really feeling very well during this time. So either, experiencing emotional symptoms or physical symptoms where they just don't feel great. And so I was looking at this and saying, why? Right. So given, that estrogen gets released in the first half of the cycle, and it does all of these things that make a whole lot of sense biologically because it's gearing your body up for conception and sex, what is progesterone doing in the second half of the cycle, and why does it make us all feel terrible?
Right.
And there hasn't really been a lot of discussion about what the function of the hormone is. And so I spent the last 2 years really diving into the science of progesterone and like, what does it do and how does it change what our bodies need and what our psychological and emotional needs are in ways that can lead some women to experience what we tend to consider as PMS.
Okay. So what did you find about progesterone? Because I feel like I've heard, I think maybe more so in like this kind of fertile time that I'm in terms of like wanting to conceive and all the things, like maybe hearing that word more so, and understanding a little bit better. But I guess, what did you find, and why is it important? Why why is in what role is it playing in not just making us feel terrible?
Yeah, well, so and this is the thing. It's like we have two sex hormones, like two primary sex hormones, estrogen and progesterone, on purpose. And it's because our body is moving us between the two activities that are necessary in order to reproduce, right? Men only have one primary sex hormone, testosterone, because the only thing that men's bodies and brains need to do in order to reproduce is have sex, right?
Yeah.
One job, one hormone. For women to reproduce, we have to do two things, right? Our bodies and our brains have to get pregnant, or I'm sorry, they have to have sex, right? So we have to have sex. But then we also have to have a fertilized egg implant and get pregnant, right? And so there's two jobs that women's bodies have to do in order to get pregnant. They have to have sex, and then they have to maintain a pregnancy, right? And so when we have two different jobs that our bodies have to do, that means we have to have two primary sex hormones. And I say primary sex hormones because both of them are equally as important as one another, which you would never know when you look at the conversations around sex hormones, right? It's all about estrogen.
Right.
And in fact, if you look at the number of scientific publications that have been conducted by scientists over the last, I don't know, I think that I limited it to the last 30 years. But even if you like span it out, I think the bias gets even worse. But the number of papers that have been published looking at the effects of estrogen on our psychology and our bodies is almost twice as frequent as what is studied on progesterone. And so it's been kind of a black box where nobody's really talking about like, what is it that our bodies are actually trying to do during this time, right? Because it seems very clear what our bodies are trying to do when estrogen is the dominant hormone, right? Again, sex and feeling energetic, and you see all that, estrogen glow. But what's going on during the second half of the cycle? Because one time, one of the things that, I think that was such an important message for my first book, This Is Your Brain on Birth Control, is just that our hormones change the version of ourselves that our brain creates. Right. And so this is true when we take the birth control pill, right? It makes us, like our brain, create a different version of ourselves than who we would be when we were off of it. But the same is true for a naturally cycling woman as she's shifting between being estrogen dominant and progesterone dominant. And I don't mean this in the way like estrogen dominant, like, get the plastics out of your, all those, all those, estrogens, but just meaning that it's the dominant sex hormone in your cycle. Right. And so as women are shifting in their cycle between being in a state where estrogen is the primary hormone and then shifting to the state where progesterone is the primary hormone, this also causes a suite of psychological and physiological changes in women's bodies that we aren't told anything about, right? And what this means is that our needs that change, right? As our hormones change, our psychological needs change, our physical needs change, and women aren't told about any of this. And the fact is, most of the recommendations that women are given for everything ranging from the number of calories that they need every day, the way that they should be exercising, what their sexual desires should look like, all of these different types of recommendations or guidance that we're given about how our body works and how our brain works is all based on research that was either conducted in men or conducted on women when they were in the state where estrogen was the primary hormone. But the fact is, these things change. And just to give you an example of this, our basal metabolic rate increases by about 11% during the second 2 weeks of the cycle compared to the first, right? And so when I give you one size fits all nutritional guidance, where I say you need to have X number of calories a day,
right?
What's going to happen to you during the last 2 weeks in the cycle? You're going to be hungry, right? And you're going to be tired and you're going to be pissed off and you're going to have food cravings because your body actually has different needs during that time that you're never told about. And so ignoring these needs and these changes that we experience has created for a lot of women this experience of what we think of as PMS.
Yeah.
And it's completely unnecessary.
Wow. Yeah, I think like just that fact that PMS is unnecessary is going to blow a lot of people's minds because I think we've just taken it on as like normal and what we have to go through. So you're saying nutritionally, lifestyle, how we work out, our mood is all affected by the progesterone. I guess
Right. And even the way that like we relate to our partners. So just to give you, I mean, so here's some really interesting research. And so we all know about the fact that when estrogen is high in the cycle, so near ovulation, women tend to experience an increase in sexual desire, right? So women tend to feel more lustful, they feel sexier, they, they want to have more sex at that time relative to the second half of the cycle. But there's also research showing that what we're looking for from sex changes across the cycle. And so many species of females, and especially female mammals like us, they don't even have sex during non-fertile points in the cycle, right? They only have sex when conception is possible. We are very rare in the fact that we have sex across the cycle. Wow. So even when we're not fertile, so during the luteal phase, so the last, those second 2 weeks in the cycle, most species, the females don't have sex at all, because it's kind of irrelevant, right? I mean, from a conception perspective.
Sure.
But human females, of course, and then there's a couple of other species like now it's gonna prairie voles.
Okay.
I'm like, what is that species?
That was my guess.
Yeah. Like so, prairie voles are another one like us. There's some other primates that also have sex across the cycle, but it's very uncommon.
It makes sense though, because if we're just listening to our natural, our natural desires on like a physical level,
right?
I'm probably not wanting to have, I know that I'm not wanting to have sex as much.
Right. Yeah, no, totally. And when you do want to have sex during the second 2 weeks, there's been some really interesting research that's been done looking at women's motivations during that time. And it's not about like sex for the, sort of sex for the purpose of sex. It's about sex for connection.
Totally.
And what they find is that for women who are feeling insecure in their relationship and are really feeling a motivation and a need to connect with their partner, that during the second half of the cycle, that they tend to have the most sex because they have that need for connection. Because the second half of the cycle is essentially all about the body coordinating activities to help promote the probability of a successful pregnancy.
Wow.
Right. And so we see all of these psychological and physiological shifts that help to promote the type of an environment, both a physical environment in a woman's body, but then also her social environment and her relationship with her partner that's geared toward pregnancy.
Wow.
And this is true whether or not women want to have kids or not, right? If you've ovulated and you're having a luteal phase, right, which is that second half of the cycle that's dominated by the sex hormone progesterone, your body is getting everything into place and getting you to behave in a way that's helping to get your environment into place. In a context that will be favorable for pregnancy and childbearing. And so it totally changes our need for connection with our partner. So what we tend to see is that even though women's sexual desire decreases during this time, that their need for connection with their partner, emotional connection and emotional support from their partner increases during this time. And this is something, again, sort of like the different calorie requirements that we talked about, women aren't told about. I don't know about you, but I was never told about this. And a lot of us assume that, sexual desire, for example, is one size fits all, right? And that it should be the same every day.
It should be consistent.
And that it should be consistent and that there's something wrong with us if we're not experiencing. Or that it should
mimic a male's or like something like that.
Yeah, that we should just be like instantly turn-onable just like men are, and that sex should always be about sex instead of sometimes sex being about sex and sometimes sex being about connection.
Yeah.
And these are just a few of the types of changes that we tend to see in how women relate to their partners and like what the meaning of sex is, like what their needs are physically in terms of their calorie needs and everything in between.
Wow. Yeah, I'm mind blown. Like, so if people listening feel like they're two different people during the month, sometimes like I notice, and I feel like I've become more attuned to this over the last couple of years. I'm like, why is something that my husband does every day annoying me this week? You know what I mean? Like, it's just like there are certain things that feel almost like magnified during certain parts of my cycle. And I've noticed that now. But before I would have lost the plot and totally spiraled. But now I'm understanding that I'm different. But I think what I need to bridge the gap on, and maybe people listening can relate, is how do we have this conversation with our partners?
Right. I think this is a really important conversation to have with our partners because, again, like, and to sort of step away from sex a little bit, but to get at some of the emotional things, like what you were just talking about. One thing that we know about the way that our brains work is that, like, the types of things that irritate us and the types of things that set off alarm bells, so make us feel, anxious within our relationship, all of that changes depending on what's going on with ourselves physically and psychologically. And when we're in a time of vulnerability, which we are when we're in the luteal phase of the cycle, because again, the sex hormone progesterone is something that's released as your body is preparing for the possibility of pregnancy.
Right.
And this is a time when women are incredibly vulnerable.
Yeah.
Right. Not only is the number one, this is the time in a woman's life when she's most likely to be murdered. Right. But this is also a time, where it's like our needs are at an all-time high. Our calorie needs are higher. And historically, women relied on men for access to food because we spent, of course, most of our history in as humans and living as hunter-gatherers. And so we are very dependent on our partners. At least historically, we've been very dependent on our partners during the time of pregnancy. And because of that vulnerability, and of course, when women are pregnant, they're less able to forage for food on their own, right? Again, thinking about this in terms of an ancestral evolutionary type of a context. So the luteal phase and pregnancy is a time that historically has been very vulnerable for women, right? And they've been very dependent on their partner. And whenever you are in a state of vulnerability, it changes the threshold that your brain creates for sending alarm bells that there's a problem, right? This is why Chihuahuas bark more than like a Great Dane, right? Because they're vulnerable, right? They're small, they could be attacked. So everything freaks them out and they freak out. Right? Our brain is the same way. And we get really anxious about things when we're more vulnerable. And when we're not vulnerable, we don't get anxious. And this is also why men will walk alone at night much more frequently than women will, right? Because we're more vulnerable. And so we are more afraid of, a bad outcome. And you sort of put this with the luteal phase in our relationships. Your partner could, during the follicular phase, so during the early phase of the cycle, when estrogen is the dominant hormone, tell you, I'm going to be late tonight. I'm going to stay and work a little bit extra. And you're like, okay, no big deal. I'll see you when you get home. Right? During the luteal phase, your brain is going to sort of fire the alarm bells. You need less evidence of a problem for you to freak out. Right? And so a lot of times what will happen is the exact same stimulus, right? So your partner's saying, I am going to stay late for work. You're thinking to yourself, oh no, like, what does that mean?
Right.
Like, what if I'm abandoned? Right. And again, it's because our need is greater. We're more vulnerable during this time. And so our brain actually changes the threshold for when it sends off the alarm bells.
Wow.
And knowing this is so helpful. And being able to communicate this to your partner is so helpful. And I'll just give you an example from my own life. I had an incident with my husband where we were trying to plan out our summer schedule.
Yeah.
Right. And he had all of these things planned that he wanted to do. Like, he had this golf trip with his friends and he was going to do this and this. And anyway, he said something, and the way that he laid it out, it was kind of like, oh, well, and you and I can go and do something on our own, right? If there's time available or something like that, right? At least that's how it came across to me. So I was very upset, right? Like, wait a minute. Like, and it could, because this made me feel unsafe, right? It made me feel like, oh, maybe he doesn't value time with me the way that, he should. And so the alarm bells were very much going off. And this was during the luteal phase of my cycle. And, I totally freaked out, slammed the door when I left. I was not willing. He called me, I hung up on him. And later on, after I'd cooled off, I thought about it. I'm like, I am in the luteal phase of my cycle. Like this, I feel anxious.
Yeah.
I lashed out because I was feeling vulnerable. Right. And do I have need to feel this afraid? Like, and I went through the sort of, no, I don't. Like, no, he's always shown that he values me and, this and that and the other thing. But also, sometimes I'm not able to talk myself off the cliff just by sort of understanding like, okay, my brain is firing alarm bells and it's more likely to do this because I'm more vulnerable during this time. Sometimes I also need additional assurances. And so I talked to him and told him like, my brain is firing alarm bells. And this is because, I'm at this vulnerable point in my cycle. And I just need added assurances that I'm safe and that you value our relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And, and that's exactly what he did, and being able to talk to him about this is so helpful to me. And I think that most men, and with this and also the sexual desire piece, I mean, I think men are so, if they're in a relationship with a woman, they just don't understand what it means to be cyclical. They just don't understand what it means to have a brain that's cycling because our hormones are cycling.
Right.
And being able to talk to them about the fact that we are going to cycle through periods of higher and lower sexual desire, right? And at some point, sexual desire is going to be all about like, just like hot, lustful sex. And sometimes it's going to be about a need for connection. And so the quickie just is not going to cut it.
Yeah.
Right. And also understanding that sometimes, smaller things will set off my alarm bells.
Sure.
And then understanding that other times I'll be more resilient to that. Men are like so happy to have this information.
They need the info.
They do. And I mean, seriously, and having these conversations with our partners, I think is so critical. And as long as you're not in a relationship with a total jerk, who's going to throw that in your face. And, every time that you have something go on that, makes you feel sensitive that they're not,
throwing that back at
you. Then I really think there's huge value in you in doing that. And it's really, it's really transformed my relationship, and it really has deepened my relationship because there's so much more of an understanding of what's going on with me that allows us to be able to navigate some of these like, typical road bumps that people experience in relationships.
I think it's so important. I think the lead up to the conversation always feels harder than the actual conversation, and I think to your point, they are receptive because it helps them. It helps them be better. So it's truly a win-win. Is there a way in which you help your husband to track your cycle, or is it just kind of like he has an awareness that at certain times things might be a little bit different? Or...
Yeah. Well, it's funny because he is so tuned into it now that he always knows more than I do. Where he's like, wait, where are you? Like, you're like day 18 right now, aren't you? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I think I'm like day 14. And he's like, no, I'm pretty sure it's 18. And I'll pull up my tracker and I'm like, yeah, you're right. It's 18.
Wow.
Like, he just
He's
knows.
an expert.
He just like has it running in the back of his head
always.
And I've got to tell you that even, it was because with my first book, I did, I just had like a little couple of short snippets about how the cycle works and how that, can influence the way that women feel and experience the world. I got so much feedback from men saying, oh my gosh, I had no idea. Like, this changes everything. Yeah. And so I think that, really talking with our partners and not assuming that they understand, because they just don't understand what it means to be cyclical. Yeah, it just
totally, because they're on a 24-hour cycle.
Yeah, they're on a 24-hour cycle. Yeah, and so it just is a totally different experience for them. Mm-hmm. And then to understand that, I think that it deepens the relationship, and then it also, it allows for better communication, allows for better sex, it allows for everybody to get what they want.
Completely. I wanted to, with the luteal phase, so we talked about, in our relationships, but are there other ways that we can support ourselves during that phase nutritionally, workout wise? What can we be aware of?
Yeah, absolutely. And so one of the things that I already talked about is just the fact that we do need more food.
Right.
And this is something that women always have a hard time with, because when you tell people that you need to eat more, you're always like, yeah, okay, whatever. I need to eat more. And you're like,
so should I work out more? Just kind of like that weird math.
Because we have this, we've been force-fed since we were really little, this one size fits all, like, here's what you need every day, right? And women, because we have these cycles, and at different periods in our cycle, we're hungrier than we are at other periods in our cycle. So we know that women eat less and move more when estrogen is the dominant hormone. So near ovulation, we're just not as hungry. Mm-hmm. We tend to move around a lot. And during the luteal phase, we tend to eat more and we tend to move around less. And we've been told, no, you are supposed to, get the same amount of exercise every day, and or at least every week if you've got a workout plan, and you're supposed to have the same number of calories every day. And so we've been trained from a very young age not to listen to our bodies, right? Because we are like, I'm hungry. I've been eating the number of calories I was told I'm supposed to eat, and I'm hungry. Or in the follicular phase, when estrogen is the dominant hormone, we're like, I'm not hungry. And I was told, and I'm told that I need to eat this and I'm not hungry. And so it's like, we've been trained to think that our body is the enemy and not to listen to it. And so we just need to totally get rid of that type of thinking and learn to trust our hunger, right? Especially during the luteal phase, because this is a time in the cycle when our resting metabolic rate increases, as I said, at like up to about 11%. So for a person who eats about 2,000 calories a day, this is like extra 175 calories a day. I mean, this is like significant. And so you need to eat more. You also need to recover longer.
Okay.
Right? Your body is not able to recover the way that it is in the follicular phase during the luteal phase.
Okay.
And the reason for this is that your body, and this doesn't sound like it should be that hard to do, but the building of the endometrial layer that the body is building to prepare for the possibility of pregnancy during that time ends up being incredibly energetically costly.
I feel like I feel it every month.
Yeah, I know, right?
You know what I mean?
No, totally. And so your heart rate goes up, and so that's going on. You have less heart rate variability. So if you are somebody who uses a tracker, you'll see that your HRV actually gets lower during the luteal phase compared to the follicular. You're just not as resilient. Wow. And so it really requires extra care in terms of rest and recovery. And it feels weird to women, again, because we're force-fed this like one-size-fits-all nutritional and rest-related guidance, but we need to eat more and move less.
Yeah.
And that that just feels so counterintuitive to everything that we're always told about what we need to be doing with ourselves, that it can be difficult to listen to. But I promise you that it makes so much of a difference in how you feel, because I've found, and even just like watching my own tracker, I can treat my body like an amusement park during the follicular phase, right? Like I can go out and stay out late with my friends, only get 5 hours of sleep, have, 2 glasses of wine at dinner. Yeah. And I wake up and I'm like rested, recovered. My HRV was good. Everything was just fine. If I do that in the luteal phase, it's terrible. My recovery is awful. My HRV is low. I just can't do that. And I found that if I make small shifts where I just make sure that I go to bed even 30 minutes earlier, right, to make sure that I'm getting that extra recovery, right, minimizing or completely abstaining from alcohol, changing my workout in ways that prioritizes strength building and high intensity cardio during the follicular phase when estrogen is dominant, and then focusing more on sort of meditative forms of exercise, like I love going for walks. So walks and yoga and things that are restorative. What I found is by making these shifts is that not only did my relationship with myself get better during the luteal phase of the cycle, not having all these food cravings, not feeling exhausted and cranky all of the time because my resources are all depleted, but I actually got stronger, which was crazy for me because I have spent, the last, I don't know, I think it was probably about 10 years ago that I really got into strength building and just making sure that I'm lifting weights and building being able to, maintain muscle mass. And I had kind of plateaued at the amount that I was able to lift for a really long time. And I finally decided to put the science that I'd been learning to put the rubber to the road and shift the way that I was exercising to prioritize strength building in the early parts of the cycle and prioritize more, like restorative forms of exercise, like those beautiful walks outside. I got stronger. I go over the research on all of this in the book, but sure enough, estrogen actually primes different types of pathways in the body that help to promote muscle building.
Really?
And it's because it's anabolic, like a steroid, right? It's an anabolic steroid. Progesterone is actually catabolic, and it actually likes to break muscle down and break different types of proteins down. And it does this because it likes to take all those amino acids for building that endometrial layer.
Wow.
And so so they've done studies where they'll have women following the exact same strength building routine, where they're either doing most of the strength building in the early half of the cycle when estrogen is dominant, or in a different group of women, they had them doing the same amount of exercise, but instead they were doing the majority of the strength building in the luteal phase and then doing other stuff in the follicular phase. And what they found was that despite the fact that these two groups of women were doing identical amounts of exercise, that the group who did the strength building in the follicular phase, so when estrogen is dominant, the first 2 weeks of the cycle, that they put on significantly more muscle mass than women doing the exact same workouts in the second half of the cycle. Wow. And so it's like, why are we exhausting ourselves by doing the same workout every single day? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense.
That's so crazy.
It's like we've all been led to believe that we're the same as men, and a lot of this has just been it's been laziness, honestly, on the part of science, where they haven't taken the time to actually really look and spend time understanding the way that our hormones and our cyclical changes in our hormones influence the way that our bodies respond to things. Yeah. And instead, they've just tried to study women as if they were small men, only including them in research during these narrow windows of the cycle when estrogen is the dominant hormone. And so women are never told about the fact that all of these things change in that last 2 weeks, right? And when we, follow this guidance that we're given that doesn't work for our bodies, it can make a lot of us feel really awful.
Absolutely. So would you say, just on that nutritional piece, that would you recommend more protein in the luteal phase, or is there anything we should stay away from? Is there anything in particular?
Yeah, so really great question. And the research on this is very small. So this is a very small body of research.
Which is crazy.
Yeah, I know. Well, yeah. And it's of course typical, right?
I know.
Everything with women's health, when you look at the amount of science that's been done, it's like, are you kidding me? This is the best we can do.
And what I think also is crazy, this is, I won't go too far on this, but it's I feel like now more than ever, and maybe it's always been, but maybe it's just being talked about more, where people are struggling with fertility as well.
Right.
And I'm like, why? I know we can't be doing studies on pregnant women, but why aren't we understanding what women are needing, not only to conceive, but also to create these healthier menstrual cycles in general, not have these intense PMS symptoms, because I can imagine it's affecting potentially fertility, which we can get into, but it's mind-blowing to me, because I'm like, it's a part of our human nature to conceive, you know? So it's just so wild.
So I want to put a pin in the fertility thing, because I have a lot to say about that.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But with respect to what we should be eating, again, anything that we can do to eat foods that are nourishing for our body, so whole foods, minimally processed, is going to be especially important during the second half of the cycle, because again, our body just isn't able to recover from being treated like an amusement park like it is in the first half of the cycle. Yeah. And so, really trying to make sure that you're eating nourishing foods. And in terms of whether there's specific types of macronutrients that might be important during this time, there has been a little tiny shred of research that suggests that maybe more protein is the way to go. And the reason for this is, again, our body is using so many amino acids to build that endometrial layer, which again, it's so funny because it doesn't sound, it sounds like growing fingernails. You know what I mean? It's it doesn't seem like it should be that hard to do, but it is. And it requires a lot of resources. And they've done these really cool studies where they've looked at availability of amino acids in women's bloodstream and urine, just kind of looking at what's freely available. And what you see is right after the peak in the luteal phase, when the body is in peak endometrial lining development, we become absolutely depleted, like just absolutely depleted of amino acids. And our body is just like taking everything that it can, because amino acids are, of course, the building blocks of tissue. And they're taking all of those things, breaking down muscle, doing whatever it needs to do to get these amino acids, and then using it for the endometrial layer. And so there's been a tiny bit of research that suggests that women tend to feel better when they're eating more protein. And of course, protein is, a great source of amino acids.
Yep.
And so what I've done, even though there's not a ton of science, because one of the things about this book is that it is all science-based, right? It's not just like woo-woo, like, hey, like let's, try to take naps in the luteal phase and, go for a run in the follicular phase, but it's all backed in science. And this is one of those things where there's not so much evidence where I would say like, absolutely, I know this is true, but it's low cost, right? It's like the risk is very low if like you're eating more protein in this time.
Sure.
And so I've done that in my own life, and it makes me feel fuller longer. And it makes me feel better.
Yes.
And so I tend to prioritize making sure that I'm getting more protein. And especially because I tend to eat a pretty plant-forward diet, but I do eat animal products. So I do eat meat. But I tend to eat more of it during the last 2 weeks of the cycle. Definitely. And it makes me feel better when I do so. And so so shifting, kind of shifting what I'm eating has been really helpful to me, and also helping to minimize, feeling like uncontrollably hungry, where I feel like I need to stop what I'm doing every, couple of hours to eat something. It's useful to like be able to fill up on something that's going to give me a lot of satiety.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's super helpful. You mentioned earlier a link between anxiety and progesterone. Can we talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So what's so crazy about progesterone, and this was another reason that I say that the luteal phase is sort of a neurobiological mystery, is because progesterone, believe it or not, is a hormone that has these really potent anti-anxiety effects on the brain, which is really surprising to most women because they're thinking about PMS and thinking about anxiety.
Yeah.
Right. And there's sort of a difference between anxiety and then because we did talk about lowering that threshold when we're willing to fire the alarm bells.
Yes.
And that's more of a targeted fear. So our fear response becomes more sensitive, but general anxiety, right when progesterone is highest, actually tends to be relatively low. It's when progesterone starts to fall because all of a sudden, because the luteal phase, if you think about the last 2 weeks of the cycle,
right,
they're kind of divided into, it's also divided into two halves.
Okay.
So the early luteal phase, for people who are listening, I'm like going up a curve. Your progesterone levels are rising.
Okay.
Right. And during this time, women actually tend to feel pretty sleepy and very calm because it is this very calming it causes this really calming neurobiological effect because it releases this metabolite called allopregnanolone that stimulates GABA receptors, which are the calming receptors in our brain.
Okay.
Right. So when progesterone is being released, it's breaking down and it's causing this calming effect in the brain. But then what happens is once it peaks, if we're not pregnant, then it starts to fall. And when it starts to fall, you have all of these naked receptors in your brain that were used to getting all of that progesterone. And all of a sudden they're naked and afraid.
Wow.
Right. So that is why for many women who experience really bad PMS, so beyond the sort of, I feel kind of moody and, I'm just not, I'm feeling more tired.
Yeah.
But for the women who feel like they need help, right? Like they're having some real issues. It tends to happen more frequently in the second half of the luteal phase. So either the week before the start of the period or about 2 to 3 days before the start of the period. And this is something that tends to happen to women who aren't very resilient to hormonal changes. So each one of us differs a little bit in our ability to sort of navigate all of the psychological changes that happen as our hormones change.
Why do we differ?
We differ in a lot of ways because of a lack of neuroplasticity, right? And so neuroplasticity is something that we can increase. So this is essentially how plastic is how quickly is your brain able to upregulate, and downregulate progesterone receptors. So another less nerdy way of saying that is
I love the nerdiness.
How quickly is your body able to sort of be, sort of adjust, right, the volume based on how much progesterone is being released. And so, as I said, when progesterone levels are falling, you get a lot of these naked progesterone receptors that are like, oh no, I'm anxious because I'm used to getting this calming, neurosteroid and it's gone now. What happens is women who are really able to navigate those hormonal transitions without any issues, those receptors actually recede. So they actually retract. And so they're no longer there and naked and afraid, right?
And they recede because just like they're biologically.
Yes, our brain is so cool and so plastic. Like we create and then pull back in receptors. Whoa. Yeah, so we used to always think that the brain was just sort of this, blob in the head and that you kind of had this thing and it's like not really changing, but it's very plastic. It's always changing, especially women's brains, because we have to be able to adjust to changing hormone levels.
So how can we
Great question.
create
How
that plasticity
do we create
or more?
plasticity? Yes. How do we create hormonal, like resilience to hormonal changes?
Yes.
How do we create cellular plasticity? It's really all of the pillars to good health. And it's so, it's so boring to give you the answer to this because it's everything that we can do to decrease inflammation.
Yeah.
Right. So when we keep inflammation low, we know that that's related to having more resilience to hormonal changes. Just basic physical health, because what's good for one part of your body is good for other parts of your body.
Yes.
Right. So it's the sort of pillars, the bedrocks of good health are getting a good night of sleep, having healthy circadian rhythms, which is going to help you get a good night of sleep. It's eating a nutrient-dense diet, getting physical activity, managing stress, and having meaningful relationships with other people.
Yeah.
So, doing these sorts of activities, which again, I mean, this is that wisdom that our grandparents and our parents have been telling us over and over and over again.
Yeah.
All of this also helps to promote resilience to hormonal changes.
Wow.
Yeah. And it really is, and this actually gets to the fertility issue as well.
Let's get into it. Because I'm just like, I've been thinking about the whole time. I'm like, what is the connection here? If people are wanting to get pregnant and they're experiencing these PMS symptoms, is there a connection?
Right. Well, so there's not a connection.
Okay.
But there is there is a connection between the luteal phase and fertility and pregnancy. And so this is something I want to talk about because it is almost never talked about. And I think that it's an absolute tragedy because there's so many women who struggle with infertility, sort of, like unknown infertility.
Yeah.
And the answers are really simple in a lot of cases. And this is, so to start with, ovulation is obviously required in order to get pregnant. Right. So we understand that your body releases an egg. And after the egg is released, that empty egg follicle is actually what is the endocrine structure that releases progesterone. Right. So we do not release progesterone if we fail to ovulate. Right. So if you have an anovulatory cycle, you don't release progesterone. You don't actually have a real luteal phase because it's never being released. And so we actually get more sort of symptoms of PMS during cycles that are fertile compared to infertile, which is totally counterintuitive. And most people wouldn't believe it, but the research supports that this is in fact the case.
Okay.
Now here's the part that most women aren't told about, which is the thing that I think is tragic. So let me back this up with a story and tell you that when I first started doing research on cycles, right? So women's menstrual cycles and how women's psychology changes across the cycle, we would bring women into the research laboratory, right? And we would only bring in women who were healthy, who reported having regular cycles, right? So who knew basically every month that their cycle was going to be roughly the same number of days, right? Whether it's 28 days or 30 days. We just brought in women who had regular cycles, and who were healthy. So everybody was, of a healthy body weight. Everybody was not on medication. I mean, this is like a pristine sample of women.
Right.
And they're usually, and usually the women in our sample, because we collect on a college campus,
Mm-hmm.
we get a lot of college students.
Okay.
They tend to be between the ages of about 18 and 24 to 25.
Sure.
Okay. So these are young, fertile, healthy women. And when we first started doing this research and we were measuring their cycles, and we would do it using a luteinizing hormone test, which is that LH test that women, you pee on a stick, and then it tells you whether or not you're about to ovulate.
Mm-hmm.
And what we were finding with our research was that about 30% of the time, women weren't ovulating. This is a population of women with, regular menstrual cycles who don't have any endocrinological issues.
And none of
who
them are on
healthy
birth
body weight.
control.
None of them are on birth control.
Whoa.
And we get, and their periods are coming like normally, but they're not ovulating. And I'm like, 30%, this is nuts. And so I thought we were doing something wrong because, of course, like as a researcher, you're like, there must be something that I need to. And so I talked to other researchers in the field, and it turns out everybody gets the same number. They get about 30% of cycles are anovulatory. And these are healthy women who don't even know that they're not ovulating because their periods are coming at regular intervals.
Okay.
So first thing that we need to know is that failure to ovulate is incredibly common.
Okay.
Right. Okay. And that a lot of times women have no idea that they're having these anovulatory cycles. And I'll say that they're very common. It's not generally common like for huge, long periods of time, right? Like if you're anovulatory for, a full year and never have an ovulatory cycle, that would be unusual.
Okay.
But for any given cycle, there's about a 30% chance that you might not be ovulating.
Okay.
What causes failure to ovulate? The number one thing that causes failure to ovulate in women, well, number 1 and 2, stress, lack of social connection.
Wow.
Yeah, those two things. And so we tend to think of fertility as being this issue that needs to be solved with petri dishes and syringes and in a doctor's office and with medications. And it really might be solved by joining a book club, right? Or finding some new friends. Making sure that you're prioritizing a community.
Wow.
Because the thing that I don't think that most women understand, because we've kind of medicalized our bodies in this like really bizarre way.
Yes.
Like our body will not ovulate if it doesn't feel safe to have a baby.
I mean,
and
say it again. Yes.
Our body will not ovulate if it doesn't feel safe to have a baby.
Yeah.
And part of that is stress. Like stress is one way that our brain, is getting information about how safe the environment is. And if we are under chronic stress, our brain is going to think this is not a good time to have a baby. And so it just won't ovulate.
Mm-hmm.
And especially when I think about the fact that a lot of us do this research on college women, who's more stressed out than a college woman, right? Except for a woman who's a career woman or a woman with young kids. I mean, it's so common for women to experience this like chronic stress. And they, again, we're taught as women to suck it up. It's like, don't trust your body. Don't trust your stress response. You're overreacting. You can do it all, right? You can have it all. You can, work a really stressful job and have a family and have this. That's chronic stress, and that's going to suppress fertility. And another potent suppressor of fertility is, again, not having a community. And women who have higher scores in loneliness tend to have higher rates of failure to ovulate. And just to give another example of this from research, during the COVID-19 pandemic, when not just women, but when everybody was socially isolating, they did a research study where they looked at the ovulation rates in women during the period of social sequestration that happened during COVID.
Yeah.
The rates of anovulation almost doubled.
Wow.
Just from lacking community.
Wait, that's crazy.
I mean, it really is crazy. And I don't think, again, it's like we've medicalized our bodies in such a way that it's hard to think of us as being this really organic structure, that it's like it's like air. We need social connections. We need to be able to learn to dial down our stress response. And we also need to make sure that we are getting enough food, because that's another thing that'll shut down ovulation is if you're energy intake is not sufficient to, and it's not because there's this idea out there that if you're a professional athlete or you exercise a lot, that you're going to have you're going to have suppressed ovulation and you can't get pregnant. And that's not true if you eat enough. And so they've done studies now where they found that it's not that over exercise or intense exercises suppresses fertility.
Right.
It's just generally these women are in a state of negative energy balance.
And it's like, that's stressful on the body.
And that's stress on the body.
Yeah.
And same with, they did the studies with vaccines and how that influenced fertility. And it doesn't influence fertility in the long term, but in the short term, like if you get a vaccine, you might suppress ovulation that cycle because your body's having an immune response.
Sure.
And same with if you come down with a cold or you have the flu, your body also is likely to suppress ovulation. Inflammation is stress on the body. That also decreases the probability of ovulation. And so again, I think that I provide tools in the book that women can use to try to help support ovulation, because I think that ovulation is so good for female bodies and brains.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like how we make our hormones, and our sex hormones are so good for us.
Yes.
I mean, in so many ways, like in terms of feeling our best, but also just in terms of supporting our bodies. And so I offer a lot of tools and resources that women can use to try to support ovulation. So that way they can have healthy ovulation and then also a healthy and happy luteal phase.
Yeah. Wow. My mind is like blown because it's evolutionarily, if that's a word, like when I think about, having community and deep connection, like it's the village.
It is the village.
It's where the baby is coming into to be taken. It's just, it all makes sense. But I think in this modern age, like you said, we've like over medicalized everything, and not to say that medical intervention hasn't helped and it's amazing and all the things. And I think we've like lost touch with these quote unquote, almost like basics to our health.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. 100%. And it's like, I'm so grateful for all of these technologies that we have, because especially for women, it's like, it's a terrible bind that we get put in as women where it's like, you're just starting to hit your stride with your career and all of a sudden your fertility is falling off a cliff.
Yeah.
And it's like, what? It feels really unfair, because it is unfair.
Yeah.
It sucks that our fertility starts to decline in, as early as our late 20s.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It is crazy. And it's totally unfair. And so I'm so grateful for all of the research that's being put toward trying to help women extend their fertility, whatever that looks like. But as you said, it does then sort of make us forget that, especially for women who are still cycling and, in their peak reproductive years, that it's really as simple as supporting the basic pillars of health. Yeah. And it is the village, it's throughout most of our history. And when you look at contemporary hunter-gatherer groups, it's like whether or not a child survives or not is heavily, heavily dependent on whether or not they have parents and family and tribe members around that are helping to care for and provision for a child. Because during those times, women, are pretty helpless. Like soon after you are giving birth, and then you're having to, feed your baby, and you've got a crying baby, and it's hard to get food. It's so dependent on having those relationships.
Definitely.
And so our brain is so smart, and it communicates with our ovaries, because ovulation starts in the brain. And it's it starts in the hypothalamus in the brain. So the brain tells the pituitary to tell the ovaries whether or not to start stimulating egg follicles or not.
Whoa.
And if our brain tells our ovaries to start stimulating egg follicles and they start developing and our body all of a sudden feels really unsafe, it will cut it off. Yep, it'll stop. And then those egg follicles will just wither and die, and then you don't ovulate. And so it's like having, trying to set up your world in a way that is conducive to, a healthy, you almost have to imagine like what it would have been like in tribal days, to like an environment that would be really supportive of pregnancy and really supportive of childcare. Setting up that environment for so many women is the difference between struggling with their fertility and then ovulating regularly.
Definitely.
I can't stress that enough.
And even like, if you are tracking your ovulation and kind of closely monitoring, when you have sex, all the things, and kind of understand what's happening during that hopeful like conception period, like thinking about, you know, maybe you're not, you know, flying around traveling during those 2 weeks. Maybe,
Right.
you know, it's like those
Yeah.
types of things that I don't know if we're necessarily intuitively thinking about.
Right. No, and
I'm not.
No, me either. Right. And like they did a study, for example, there was this one study where they had women getting socially, like they had them experimentally socially excluded. Right. So they like went into a situation where they felt like other people were leaving them out of a game. And then in a different condition, women felt like they were included and they were included in the game.
Yeah.
And what they found was that for the women who felt excluded, that their body during this really critical period where your body's starting to mature egg follicles were releasing hormones to stop ovulation in its tracks. It was starting to release that. Now, would it, you know, be, they didn't look and see like, did these women actually not ovulate? Probably not from one instance of that, but that their body was starting to go down that path. If you're constantly in situations where you're not feeling supported and you're not taking these types of things really seriously, you know, it can have an impact on fertility. And like you said, I mean, sometimes it's like just taking simple steps because even, you know, if you don't have control over your travel schedule all the time. And if you're trying to have a baby and you do have a lot of stress and you are having to travel and do some of these other things, even doing things like mindfulness meditations, for example, have been found to be incredibly helpful in terms of minimizing stress. You can also do meditations like loving kindness meditations that help you feel more socially supported. And so even if you're not like a super extrovert who wants to be going to parties and feeling all of the community love, there's ways that we can actually, you know, put ourselves into the appropriate mindset, because mind, you know, it's like our mind creates reality, and that's what our brain is talking to our ovaries about. And so doing some of these things to try to really support fertility, support ovulation, support healthy hormone release, support our cellular plasticity and our ability to navigate these hormonal changes can be such a game changer for women.
Yeah, this is so fascinating. I think a lot of people are going to, be note taking. So for those listening that have recently or are thinking about coming off of birth control, I know we've had our episode about that. And I'm curious, related to PMS, how they can support themselves with this like new hormonal self. Because it's like, it's totally different.
Yeah, it can be totally jarring. I mean, like, so I remember when I went off the pill, that because I went from being such a steady Eddie, you know, like when you're on the pill, it's like, it's just like every day is the same hormonally.
Yes.
And so you're pretty even keeled. And I remember when I went off of it, well, the first thing I noticed was, you know, I felt more alive and energetic and all of these like really great things. You know, I felt sexy and fun and, you know, all of these great things. But then I also like definitely, the pendulum swung the other way. Yeah. Where I was like, oh my gosh, like, cause I always thought that, you know, PMS, I'm like, what is that? Like, I don't even know what that is. Like, these people are they're exaggerating. And then when I went off it, I'm like, nope, they're not exaggerating.
Yes,
like this is a very real phenomenon. And I mean, really, again, anything that you can do to increase your resilience to the hormonal changes is going to be a game changer. Okay. And, you know, honestly, like when you look at the research, what it finds is that women who have really bad PMS, if they're not able to get that, you know, if they're not able to take steps to increase their resilience to hormonal changes, they're also the women who tend to have a bad postpartum period. And they're also the women who tend to have a terrible menopausal transition. And so our ability to navigate these hormonal changes and increase our resilience to those kinds of changes can be really powerful in terms of leading us to have a more powerful or like a more comfortable luteal phase and to get rid of PMS, but also to have a better postpartum and then also to have a better menopausal transition.
Wow.
And so, you know, I spend, and I talk about it in every chapter when I talk about all of the different ways that progesterone changes the body and, you know, what are some of the steps that we can take to sort of alleviate some of these things to make it feel like more like we're just sort of coasting up and down a smooth hill rather than, you know, climbing and falling off a cliff every month. I also have a couple of chapters that are dedicated specifically to how do we navigate and how do we increase our resilience to these hormonal changes. So that way we can have a better luteal phase, but then we can also have a better postpartum and have a better perimenopause.
Yeah. And I think these conversations are happening more and more around perimenopause, menopause. Like, yeah, I just think it's happening more. But to have this be kind of your foundation, like, you know, as women having a period and kind of shaping our resiliency around this and knowing that it serves us through every hormonal shift moving forward, because there will be many.
Yeah, because we live in cycles.
Yeah.
Right? We live in a monthly cycle where we cycle between estrogen and progesterone. We have pregnancy cycles where we cycle between pregnancy and postpartum. We have a fertility cycle where we cycle from being in high fertility to a season of infertility. You know, so we're cyclical. And the more that we can learn to navigate our cyclicity and to promote our resilience to these hormonal changes, the easier it all feels. And it really does. I mean, it really can make a big difference.
What do we need to know, just as a reminder for people, about the brain and birth control and just understanding, you know, when we come off of it, I guess, what is our brain coming from as far as being on birth control for a while?
Yeah, it can be a little gnarly, you know, it really can be. So, you know, when you're on the pill, you know, rather than waxing and waning between these two hormones, you know, where you have this period of high estrogen and then that falls, and then you're in this period of high progesterone and then that falls. For women who are on the pill, you get the same hormonal message every day, right? So there is no cycle, right? You're just getting, you know, every day is the same hormonally, and it is sort of like being a man, right? Where you're just getting, you know, the same thing every day. And when you discontinue that, and then all of a sudden are cycling between two hormones, it can feel a little, you know, a little crazy. And like I said, I remember having the experience where I was like, oh my gosh, this is the best I've ever felt, you know, right near ovulation. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And then going into the luteal phase and thinking, what is this? Like, what happened? And, you know, essentially what's happening is our body is having to learn how to adjust to, you know, from being this, you know, every day is the same hormonally self to somebody who's cycling. And that, again, requires you to have a lot of cellular plasticity and neuroplasticity. And that takes a little bit of time to build. And so for women who are transitioning off of the pill, especially if they've been on it for a long time, it can take a little bit of time for their brain to catch on to what's happening, right? But it does happen. And, you know, for many women, it can happen as soon as like about a month and a half or 2 months after they discontinue, because many women will start ovulating again within about 6 weeks of discontinuing the pill. And as soon as they start ovulating again, you start to feel a little bit more normal, right? And then your body has to kind of learn the ropes and learn how to navigate, you know, again, adjusting like how many receptors are present to get the hormones, and then retracting and being able to navigate that smoothly. And that can take women sometimes, you know, from as little as like a couple months to all the way up to, you know, a year. I've heard from women who've had difficulty even after a full year has gone by, where they still aren't quite feeling like themselves. And, you know, for those women, I definitely make the recommendation that, you know, a lot of the things that I talk about in my new book about promoting your resilience to hormonal changes and ways to support ovulation are going to help get you there quicker. Because again, it's all about getting your body back to being regularly ovulating, which is the sort of normal state for a woman who's not pregnant, who's of reproductive age. And then also being able then to navigate those by having a lot of cellular plasticity. So all of the, you know, all of the little brain cells are able to quickly adapt to what's happening. And that way you don't feel as sort of, you know, like you're learning to drive stick shift, you know, like where you're shifting between first and second gear. And you're like, whoa, but where you can become really adept at it, where it's like, yeah, like if you really pay attention, you can tell that you're shifting and that there's a little bit of a different energetic shift. But it doesn't need to feel terrible.
Yeah. And I think these conversations help, you know, it's like when we kind of bring what is happening biologically to light, then people feel less alone. They feel less crazy. And that's kind of like my last question around, you know, I think there has been in society and culture kind of this narrative around hormones where it's like, she's crazy, the hormones are crazy, or even like I remember in postpartum, I'm like, oh, my hormones are crazy, you know, and not really honoring the truly natural cyclical nature of what's happening. So I guess, you know, what would you say to women who are, you know, in job environments, who are just kind of like very much listening to that narrative around their hormones? Like, how can they like reclaim the beauty of, the power of their cycle, their hormones? Because I do, you know, the mind is very powerful. If we like believe something, you know, we can have a totally different experience.
Yeah. Well, so to them, here's what I say. And this is, there's nothing wrong with being hormonal. Everybody is hormonal. Men are hormonal, right? They just have one primary sex hormone. And when their primary sex hormone changes, men change. So when men's testosterone levels are increasing, for example, they are more likely to behave aggressively if provoked. Their sexual desire is greater, right? And we don't think that's crazy, right? And so when our hormones change, it also influences who we are. And the idea that there's something wrong with having hormones that cycle is nothing more than a byproduct of the fact that we've all been force-fed this belief that the only way to be is male, right? And that the male way of being is somehow superior to the female way of being, right? Nobody's even asked to consider, like, where are these assumptions coming from? You know, like, what's wrong with having a cycle? Like, you know, there's no reason that we couldn't turn the tables on that narrative that exists and say, men can't make good decisions because they only have this one hormone. And so they can't think of things from two different angles. They can only think of things from one different angle. And so women have a superior way of being because we're able to look at things from different, you know, perspectives, depending on what hormone is dominant. It's just that that's not, you know, sort of where culture landed, right? Culture landed with male as the assumption of what is normal. And from that, we've all sort of bought into this belief that there's something wrong with being female, but that's just not true.
Yeah. There's so much power in it. And I think even just, you know, I almost treat it as like part of my job as like a thriving human being to pay attention to that stuff now. I think maybe it's after pregnancy and just kind of tuning into my body more. I'm like, it is like the unlock for us as women.
Yeah.
We can be better partners, friends, better at our jobs, love our life more. You know, it's just, it is a true unlock. And so to spend time and care and attention here in this part of our health is like more than worth it. I know it can feel like, oh, this is too much. I don't have time for this. You know, I don't think we prioritize this stuff as much as we should, but it can improve everything else.
It really can. And I mean, honestly, it doesn't need to be that complicated.
I know.
Because I think that sometimes, because you'll have these like purists who are like, well, if you're not tracking your cervical mucus and you're not, you know, this, and it's like, not everybody wants to do that.
Totally.
And it doesn't need to, you know, it doesn't need to be that complicated. And you don't need to ask your boss to schedule meetings around your period. You know, it's like it doesn't require that level of care. Even simply like getting something that tracks your body temperature, like a ring, the Oura ring or something to that effect, can at least give you some insight into what's happening. I always recommend starting to just track things because I like to, but if you don't want to do that, you just want to keep it simple, stupid. Temperature is low. You're probably in the follicular phase of your cycle. Temperature is high. Your body temperature increases when progesterone is released. And so that means that you're in the luteal phase of your cycle. And then just making these really small adjustments. And, you know, I make recommendations about small things that you can do that don't need to turn your life upside down. Because most people don't want to have their life turned upside down by the fact that they cycle. But it really doesn't require that much effort. And it doesn't require, you know, meditating on a mountainside every luteal phase. It's just making these small little adjustments. And as you said, and I love how you phrase it, it's the great unlock. It is. It just unlocks, everything.
And to your story earlier, it can unlock so much in your relationship if you're in relationship.
Oh, 100%.
You know, so I just encourage people to have that conversation. Maybe even send this episode to someone.
Yeah, I love that idea.
You know, I'm going to give it to my husband. We're going to talk about it tonight, actually. But this has been incredible. The book is The Period Brain. I'm so thankful for your work, your writing. It's just made such a big impact on our audience. So I'm really grateful. So where can people find you?
So you can find me on my website is sarahehill.com, and that's Sarah with an H. And I'm on all social platforms with Sarah E. Hill, PhD, but I'm most active on Instagram.
Amazing. Thank you so much. This has been wonderful.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad that you had me.
So great. Amazing. We'll see you later. Thank you so much, Sarah. You can follow Sarah on Instagram at Sarah Hill, PhD. And the new book is out now. It's called The Period Brain, The New Science of Why We PMS and How to Fix It.
All right, guys, Morning Microdose is the Clips channel for all the greatest hits of Almost 30. It's a free podcast with no ads at all. They're between 5 and 10 minutes. It's like the best of the best. I just got a DM this morning from someone that was like, this really hit. It was so powerful. So Morning Microdose is a great channel for that. Subscribe, rate, and review Almost 30. It means the world to us. We've had 800 episodes. We've been doing this thing for a while. So it's so nice to just show us a little bit of love there and just appreciation. You can find us on YouTube. We got that video on YouTube, baby. And then Almost 30 Podcast on TikTok and Instagram. I'm on Instagram at It's Krista.
And I'm at Lindsey Simsick. We love y'all.
Love y'all.
See ya.